wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawk fans, welcome into the show, the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. We've got big, huge news today dropping in a blockbuster deal with the Denver Broncos. The Seahawks franchise quarterback for the last 10 years, Russell Wilson, is now going to be a Bronco. Broncos sending back multiple picks and some players, and we're here to talk about it. And there's a lot to talk about, and a lot of different, paths we could take. Keith's not happy. I'm not happy. I'm trying to see some upside. It's hard. Keith's not seeing any upside, so now I'm going to try to convince him there might be a sliver of upside. I don't know how this conversation is going to go, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I'm not seeing any upside because you cannot win without a quarterback, and the Seahawks now don't have a quarterback, and they don't have a path to a quarterback. So they are officially not going to win because you can't win without a quarterback, and there's no way for them to acquire one. So they intentionally said, we're going to lose.
The Jared Goff Rams would have a moment with you, like the Jimmy Garoppolo 49ers would maybe like to have a word.
Yeah.
And there are teams that win with marginal quarterbacks with great rosters around them.
And the Seahawks don't have a great roster. We saw that this last year.
At this point, in the offseason.
The Rams just stop, Bill. Will you let me actually get a sentence out? Because you have not let me get a sentence out yet. The Rams had Goff, and what did they do? They said, screw it. We can't win like this. And they jettisoned him and gave away their entire future for Stafford. The 49ers had Garoppolo, and they go, damn, we can't win with this guy. So they traded away 3 first-round picks to go get a rookie.
Yes, and then
you're trying
to
still
made it to the NFC Championship game.
You're trying to sell me, oh, you can win with one of those guys, except for the teams that have them already stated you can't win with these guys. You have to go get somebody good. The Seahawks had somebody good, and they just gave him up for crap. It was a terrible trade.
So
absolutely a terrible trade.
First of all, let me apologize to you. I'm not trying to be lighthearted about this. I'm taking you seriously. I'm just laughing because of the absurdity of it all. And I'm sorry I didn't let you get your word in. So let's talk about it. So it seems Adam Schefter's reporting that this trade apparently has been in the works for a couple of weeks. I would anticipate it's probably been even longer than that, really. That's just kind of the word on the street. According to sources out of Denver, Russell Wilson was always the target 1A, and Aaron Rodgers was not in play with them, which is surprising to a lot of people. A lot of people assumed Aaron Rodgers would be their number one choice, especially after Hackett was hired, and turns out it was always Wilson. And I go back to the Jody. Well, you can go back a couple of years. I mean, this trade talk has been going on for a while, back and forth. They've quieted it. It's come up again. Russell Wilson's made statements. Pete Carroll's made statements. It seemed like it was a kind of put to bed, more or less, at least as far as a serious conversation was concerned. And I was surprised. I mean, it was like jaw-dropping surprise when this hit today, because I just thought that this was not even possible. In that, you're right, Keith, the team doesn't have any options for quarterback beyond Russell Wilson. And so now they're flying just literally blind, going into a draft, going into free agency where there's really no
good quarterbacks in the draft. There's no good quarterbacks that's going to hit free agency, which is why people kept talking about Russell Wilson, even when the team said he wasn't available, was because there's no other quarterbacks available that are worth a damn.
Right.
There just isn't. And the Seahawks are all like, okay, that's a great time for us to need a quarterback. And jettison.
Do you think that this is a 2-year plan as opposed to just this year? I mean, obviously, solving this particular situation is a complete crapshoot in year one because of those variables that you just talked about. Is this a 2-year deal where this is a rebuild? This, because you now do not have a franchise quarterback, you shipped him off for a bunch of young players and picks. That this is now a rebuild that Pete Carroll at age 71 this year is taking on, which is just crazy. It doesn't make any sense, and I don't get it. But
you have a roster that was close. You have a roster that was close. They needed a cornerback, and they needed an offensive lineman, and maybe an interior pass rusher. This is a roster that was close. Now it's a roster that is miles away from contending. Miles. If you're not going to rebuild and do the whole thing, and I'm talking about trade Bobby Wagner for whatever you can get, trade Jamal Adams for whatever you can get,
Lockett's apparently on the block.
Metcalf. I wouldn't. Well, Metcalf needs to stay because he's young enough that he'll still be here and be in his prime when this rebuild is done. So you keep him, but you trade Lockett, you trade Dunlap and any of the veteran defensive players. You just completely unload and you just go super young and you start over. If you do that, and essentially you're terrible in this year, 2022. And you are so bad that you're in position to get a quarterback in next year's draft, fine. Then you can build around that player. But if you don't do that and you half-ass this thing and you go 7-10 and you end up with the 12th pick in the draft and you can't get yourself a franchise quarterback because you're too low in the draft order, then not only have you given away your only path towards winning now, but you've also screwed up any path on winning in the future. You've now become a mediocre team for the foreseeable future.
Let's talk about that, and I want to get your opinion on it. Let's talk about a couple different factors first. I wanted to mention the Aaron Rodgers deal. Aaron Rodgers decided to re-sign with the Green Bay Packers in a blockbuster deal, 4 years, $200 million with $153 million in guarantees.
That apparently he has said, Rodgers came out and said, that's not real.
Yeah, I saw that, but I would imagine it's going to be in that neighborhood.
It might be, but where the reports of here's the numbers on his contract when those numbers aren't actually agreed upon, I think is it's dishonest. Are the numbers going to be in that range? Probably, but we don't know what they are, and we don't know what Wilson's going to get.
My point is, I think that I thought that may have been a factor because literally an hour and a half or so after that came out is when this trade went down. And this trade has been in the works for 2 weeks. You already said that. Correct. It had nothing to do with Aaron Rodgers. Correct, but
it had nothing to do with Aaron Rodgers.
Somebody had to push the button for the trade at the end, and it was John Schneider. And I'm sure he probably looked and said, "Oh my goodness, that's a factor. We're going to have to pay Russell Wilson that. Next year is his year of extension opportunity." And I think that may have been a factor as far as long-term thinking with the franchise. Can we afford to pay that? Do we want to pay that quarterback and Russell Wilson specifically that amount of money in the franchise going forward? I'm just saying that may have been a factor. The other thing I want to talk about is the compensation because I think it goes to.
I want to answer your question on that. What do you think Denver thinks about that? What do you think Tennessee would think about that? What about Miami? All these teams that have been quarterback hungry forever because they don't have one. They go, you know what? You give us a Russell Wilson, I'll pay him anything.
And to your point, the cap is going up massively in 2023 as the new media deals flow in, and the cap is reportedly going to explode up to like the 250 million range from 208 this year. So
208.3 is going to be 248 or something. That totally makes up.
So
for
what
the
we're saying,
Wilson and
exactly. So what we're saying is the percentage of the cap that you're paying to your quarterback is roughly the same, even though it's a mammoth increase in compensation. Okay.
So that should not have been a factor. And if it was a factor, then you need a new general manager, because that should not have been a factor.
So the next idea would be that you had said, even if we are marginally okay next year and do it half-assed and go 7-9, it might ruin our chances to get a quarterback. I want to just talk about compensation in this and then talk about that scenario as well. So what we got for Wilson from Denver was a 2022 first-round pick. It's 9th overall in this draft coming up. The 2022 second-round pick, which is 40th overall. We have 41 already. The 2022 fifth-round pick is 152 overall. We have 153. They get our later fourth-round pick back. I think it's 119 in this year's draft. We also get a first-round pick in 2023 and a second-round pick in 2023, plus players, quarterback Drew Lock, defensive end, defensive tackle Shelby Harris, and tight end Noah Fant. Noah Fant's a good piece out of that list. Shelby Harris is definitely a nice role player on the defensive line, and then Drew Lock is Drew Lock. We can talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
The only reason Drew Lock was included in this is because by moving him off the roster, it removes any chance that there's guys in the locker room in Denver that were friends with Lock that are going to give Wilson shit because they want, their guy is the guy who got benched for him. By moving him off the roster, you get rid of that dynamic in the thing. The Seahawks were willing to take him on. There's zero commitment to him. You could cut him tomorrow.
Exactly.
He is not a piece of that trade that actually matters. He's a guy who's lost his job twice as a starting quarterback in Denver. He got it, lost it, got it back, lost it again. He's not a good player. He's not going to be part of the future. And if they're planning on him being part of the future, why? What evidence do you have from his entire time in the NFL that suggests that he is worthy of a roster spot? You don't really have any.
In 17 game starts, he's 354 of 599 for 60% completion percentage. Adjusted completion percentage is 70%, 3,953 yards. This is basically a full season, 17 games. 3,953 yards, so almost 4,000 yards, 23 touchdowns, 18 interceptions, 6.6 yards per attempt, which is low. But an average depth of target of 9 yards, which is good. So
that's not
good. Where he's at.
It's slightly above average. It means he throws the ball down the field, but
he's got a hell of an arm.
He does.
And maybe that's why Seattle asked.
He throws the ball down the field, but he doesn't throw the ball down the field accurately enough to turn it into big plays. So his yards per pass attempt is not good. It's actually well below average in the sixes. And his completion percentage is right at 60%. It's about 8% lower than Wilson. He is not a starting quarterback.
And Noah Fant as a receiving tight end at about 249 pounds was a first round pick a few years ago. Has really high upsides, like Gerald Everett on steroids. It's a nice add to the offense if we have a quarterback to throw to him.
Yep. Actually, and the thing is, like, getting Noah Fant, that is a piece I like, because they had Gerald Everett. He was a really nice piece for Seattle this last year, and he's now a free agent. He's probably going to get paid because he had a good year with the Rams the year before, signed a 1-year deal with Seattle, had a good year with Seattle. Someone's going to pay him to come in and be a part of their offense, and so he's going to be gone. And Seattle got an upgrade. I really think he's an upgrade. So I like that part of the trade.
I agree.
I like the defensive end that they got back more than you do. You're like, he's a rotational piece. I'm like, he is a significant upgrade over Kerry Hyder at defensive end. I think he's
or Rasheem Green even.
Yeah. So he's, and Rasheem Green's a free agent. So
yes,
to me, he's a significant upgrade over either of those guys. I like that piece. 2 first-round picks, 2 seconds. My original thought was that's just it's a terrible compensation, because I was thinking back to the Stafford trade a year ago, and I had to go back and look. And what the Lions got for Stafford was 2 first-round picks, a second, and a third. So the Seahawks got 2 first-round picks, a second, and a second, but they also had to move down about 50 spots this year from the 4th to the 5th. So it's about the same.
Plus a bounty of players. Well, not a bounty, but 2 decent players.
Yeah, it's
two
not the players don't matter as much, because when you're looking at it from
Shelby
all of
Harris
this,
is on a contract year.
You're looking at guys that may have been looking at getting casualtied, or even if they aren't, someone else was going to be, and so it just adds roster flexibility is the only reason why they're included. And so I look at that and I go, they got essentially the same compensation for Wilson that the Lions did for Stafford, and Wilson is younger and significantly better. And
to add injury to insult, the Seahawks ate $26 million in cap, dead cap space with this deal, which in turn allowed Denver to pay Russell Wilson's base salaries in 2022 and 2023, which is $24 million this year, $27 million next year. So they get Russell Wilson at a steep discount as well.
Well, it's not. So that's because of his signing bonus and the dead cap and all of that. That's not hey, the Seahawks are the Broncos are paying his base salary.
Yes.
And they were going to do that no
which is a great cap savings for them, though, for a premier player.
So they get a premier player for less for 1 year, and then they have to sign him to the massive deal you were talking about a few minutes ago.
Correct.
So okay. Whatever.
Nonetheless, I'm just saying, to me, it just adds insult to the deal.
And I don't think that matters to Seattle too, because even though they gave, they had to take this hit with all the dead money, they actually gained significant cap room.
They gained $11 million this year in cap space.
Yeah, and that's taking on 3 players and their cap hit on top of the dead money and Wilson. They still came out in the cap $11 million in the black. So the dead money doesn't matter that much, because a year from now they get all of that cap space back anyway, and you're not going to go out. You're not going to go out and spend 35 or 40 million on a quarterback this year because there's no one available.
Okay, so I want to talk to you about that. Because earlier you said, hey, we could be middling, go 7-9, have a crappy, middling first round draft pick and not be able to go get the guy that we really want. And I just want to point out the idea of Seattle would go into 2023 draft with 2 first round draft picks plus 2 second round draft picks next year to be able to move around. True. So if they needed to, they could go get the guy that they really wanted.
And one of those first and one of those seconds are going to be the last 4 picks of each round.
And the Seahawks pick is probably going to be better than 12.
The Seahawks pick,
it's going to be better. It's going to worse it.
If they end up middling and they go 7 and 10, they're going to be 11th or 12th. But the Broncos are going to be 30th or 32nd if they have their way. But it's probably going to be 29th. They're going to be those picks are way down at the end of the round. They're not going to be helpful on getting a quarterback. They really aren't.
And we and we would have a future, like a 2024 first round pick that we could add to the pile. I'm just saying there would be enough capital there to be able to move, I think, up close to the top if we really wanted to. Just similar to what the 49ers did to go get Justin Fields, that sort of thing.
Well, if they were going to make this move now, they should have made it a year ago.
Yeah.
when the Bears
next year.
The Bears were offering more in draft compensation with 3 first-round picks and a second and a third to Seattle. They could have done that and got Fields, because the Bears got Fields. They didn't have to trade up, and they got a franchise quarterback a year ago in a draft that had a bunch of franchise quarterbacks. They would have been in position to get one. Instead, they waited till this year, and they got less in compensation than what the Bears were offering, and they're in a draft class with no good quarterbacks.
So early reports by Corbin Smith indicate that Seattle has interest in a quarterback out of this draft class. And that's what made them feel comfortable in making this move. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that's, I don't know. For me, it could be 3 guys. Obviously, Malik Willis, who I think really helped himself in the Senior Bowl and the Combine. And then Kenny Pickett with his 8.5-inch hands.
So Dave Craig Jr.
And Desmond Ridder, the quarterback out of Cincinnati, I think that they really like as well.
Yeah.
So
I know I'm not interested in his lack of arm strength, and I'm not interested in Dave Craig Jr. We've seen that show before. We don't need to go see it again. And
what do you think about Malik Willis at 9? If we stayed at 9,
Malik Willis is a very interesting player. He has got so many physical tools. I mean, he is, if you think about it, he is Murray in Arizona. He's a little bit taller, but he's got the speed. He's got the stuff. He's got a huge arm, but he also can't read a defense to save his life because he played at Liberty.
He's a one-read guy.
He's a drop back. If his read is covered, he tucks the ball and run. That's all he's got, and he's gonna be.
That's all he was
way.
asked to do too.
Yeah, that is all he is. He is not ready to be an NFL quarterback, despite all of the physical tools that make him really interesting. If you go get him, you better be willing to sign Teddy Bridgewater or someone in free agency to play quarterback in this next year, because Malik Willis playing at quarterback next year is not good for him or the team, because he'll do nothing but develop bad habits. You need him an opportunity to truly learn the game at the NFL level before you throw him out there to get killed.
So I know it's early in this situation, and I'm sure it's fluid, and the Seahawks are probably not done. But what do you see them doing this year at the quarterback position? Like, what would be their strategy? Obviously, they've got a plan, and they executed the first part of their plan here with this trade. Don't have to agree with it. I'm just saying that's it. They executed this part of it. Obviously, this is not where we end up with Drew Lock as the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks in 2022. What do you think is their idea of their plan forward? I heard, again, Corbin Smith say that it's likely that the Seahawks still view their team as a win-now team. But this move doesn't say that. This move says the opposite of that.
This move says we are starting over.
Yeah,
and if they think they're going to win now without their quarterback,
but who could they win now with that they could make a move with? They've got draft capital now. They've got the trade market available. They've got free agency. We already know that those free agent quarterbacks are marginal at best. I'll grab the list here in just a second. And
Mitch Trubisky.
And then we've got the quarterbacks are Winston, Bridgewater, Mariota, Dalton, Fitzpatrick, Trubisky, Brisket, Taylor, Smith, and Colt McCoy. So that's the awful free agency market. Mm-hmm. The trade market, whatever you can get, and then the draft. So what's the path forward, Keith? If they want it, if they say they're win now, they're going to go out and compete. What is the path?
The path forward will probably then be, so they got 2 1s and 2 2s for Wilson, and if they can go trade one of those 1s and one of those 2s and keep the other 2 picks and go get a guy like Derek Carr, that might be the path forward. So you are able to downgrade at quarterback, but still have a guy you can win with, and also, still get extra picks. If they want to win now, that's probably the only path forward they have. None of the guys that are available in free agency are guys you can go contend with. They're guys that you can win a few games with. Teddy Bridgewater is one of those guys, and you keep bringing up Mariota because you're an Oregon fan, but he's done nothing in the NFL to show that he deserves a shot at a starting quarterback job. I mean, it's definitely telling that the Titans got significantly better when they moved from him to Ryan Tannehill, and we all know that Tannehill's not a true franchise quarterback either. So there just isn't that guy available unless you're gonna go make a trade for someone like Carr. And if you're gonna make a trade for someone like Carr, why didn't you keep Wilson? Why didn't you keep the better option? Why didn't you keep the better player?
I think that, you have to take a look at this as being a two-way street. It's not just about the Seahawks and the franchise and Pete Carroll. This was a Russell Wilson thing too. The whole time, in fact. Wilson kind of made things interesting once in a while. He talked about different things. His agent talked about different things. And as far as being amenable to a trade and so forth. And I think the Seahawks finally got to the point where they were going to move on from Russell Wilson, and Russell Wilson was ready to move on from them. And that's why this trade went down. This trade doesn't happen unless Russell Wilson wants this trade to happen.
But this situation never had to get here.
No, it didn't.
It never had to get to this point. It never had to get.
But it seemed like it was a long-term sort of situation. It just didn't happen overnight last year in the offseason. It seemed like it was boiling up for a while, going clear back into like 2015 and so forth, and having issues with different players in the locker room and so forth. You heard reports. I don't know these things for a fact. I'm just saying that some of these things were coming out where, he's got a bit of an ego thing, and it interfered with this process of. I
don't know if that's an accurate characterization.
It's probably not accurate, Keith. I don't know for sure.
From all of the all the reports and everything that I've read, it wasn't that he had an ego. It was that he was given credit and a big salary and all those things because he played quarterback, and the guys like Richard Sherman wanted the credit. They wanted to be the guy that everyone pointed to and said they're the reason, that he's the reason why they won, why they have a Super Bowl. And instead, people pointed to Wilson, and it was the ego of the defensive players that.
So what do you think
became a problem?
Why do you think it got to this point with it breaking down enough to where this was even on the table?
It got to this point because Pete Carroll hired Brian Schottenheimer as a coordinator. What you did was you took Russell Wilson's his prime years, his best years, and you saddled him under an awful scheme that was really poorly coached, and asked him, like, here, we're not going to give you anything to work with schematically and in terms of what we do, but we need you to go bail us out. And he said enough. And he went into, this is the report from The Athletic. He went into a game planning meeting and said, enough. What we're doing is not working. Here's how we fix the offense. And he got told to shove it. That's where things went wrong. Hire an offensive coordinator 5 years ago or 5 years ago that isn't completely incompetent, and we never reached this point. Or 2 years ago, listen to your franchise player and actually hear what he has to say and listen to the guy that's on the field and knows what's going on, and you don't get to this point. They got to this point because it was completely mismanaged by Pete Carroll from the beginning. And you and I both like Pete Carroll. He's a great coach. He's developed a tremendous culture in Seattle, a culture of winning, a culture that guys want to come play for. But in this case, in this situation, with this player, he's misplayed his hand.
That sounds about right. So where do they go from here?
Hopefully they go 3-14. Hopefully,
I don't think that they have a 3-14 roster.
Hopefully they trade Bobby Wagner. They trade Tyler Lockett. They trade Jamal Adams. They trade Carlos Dunlap.
Diggs doesn't come back, etc. Why would he want to?
He wouldn't want to, and they have no reason to re-sign him. Keep the cap flexibility for the following
unless
year.
they really do believe that they're going to run this thing back and get a quarterback to take it as far as they can.
But I think you go in and you trade anyone that's over 28 that has value, and you go between this year and next year. You get it up so that you've got 12 to 14 picks in each of the two this year and next year, and you got the roster and you got the salary cap, and you go into this year knowing that you're going to be 3-14, and you're going to have a chance at the top or the second best quarterback in the draft class, and you know that next year's draft class is good compared to this year's draft class, and you be okay with that. And you use all that draft capital that you've got to build the roster around him. And you run it back to 2012. And you're going to have a rookie quarterback and a lot of really young, cheap, hungry players around them. And you go make it happen. But if you don't do that, if you don't go ahead and commit to the bad year and the path to a quarterback, if you half-ass the rebuild and you go 7-9 and you have the 11th pick and you're not going to be in position to get a quarterback, or you can get one, but you've got to give up a ton of your picks to move up to get them, and thus can't rebuild the rest of your roster because you've given up all that flexibility in draft capital to do so, then you screwed it up.
I just don't see Pete Carroll being that guy. Like, from the outset, having a losing mentality. I don't see them acquiring a player like Shelby Harris out of this trade if they believe that they're ready to move on and get younger, because he's not that. He's 31.
Yeah.
Now, Noah Fant obviously is the upside there.
Shelby Harris
is a young quarterback. But
Shelby Harris is a guy that I would turn right around and see what he would fetch on the open market. I wouldn't even, he shouldn't even play a snap. If they're going to do this, he shouldn't play a snap in Seattle. He needs to get traded again.
That is interesting. That's an interesting idea. I just don't know if Pete Carroll is the right coach to have made this sort of deal with the devil, because he's not
at 71.
That's just not, this thing isn't lining up completely. That's why I think the Seahawks are not done. They've got like a secondary plan in place to go trade for a guy. I don't know if it's Garoppolo or if it's some other marginal player, Hurts, or, some other quarterback that's, maybe Philadelphia feels like it's in a position where they can take a couple of its picks and move up a little bit and get the guy that they really like in the draft, and Hurts would be available. I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's hard when a team does this out of the blue, because they've traded away a player that they have no replacement for, with no viable path to a replacement level player at all.
Yeah, but it's different if you do that to a defensive lineman, because you can add pieces around that and make up for the fact that you didn't recover the talent at that position. You can't do that at quarterback. You can't bring in, let's say Jimmy Garoppolo gets cut by the 49ers and is just available out there, and you go in and sign him. You aren't you can't put enough pieces around that drop in quarterback in one offseason to make it a comparable loss. Right. They took more than one. They took 4 massive steps backwards, and there's no recovery from that. Unless somehow you've got a guy coming into town that you and I don't see coming because no one in the media is saying they're available.
How about Kirk Cousins? I'm just saying Kirk Cousins.
Again, you just took 2 massive steps backwards.
Right. But you do have an opportunity to build a team.
So you got to go trade. You have to go trade.
I still think that would still be a 7 or 8 win team with him.
Yeah, you got to go trade your draft capital. The draft capital that is the only thing you've got going for you on a rebuild to bring in a guy that's significantly worse than the guy you had.
I think the only viable path
about the same that the guy you had.
The only viable path forward this year without losing any draft capital, without doing anything else except for go get a viable either first-rate backup or marginal starter. Let's just say it's Mariota or one of these other guys, Winston, Bridgewater, you name it, Dalton, and go draft your guy. Just go get the Malik Willis pick and see what you got.
I would sign Bridgewater and draft Willis with that 9th pick and know that you got the 40th pick and 2 picks at the end of rounds 1 and 2 next year to help you rebuild the roster. And
it's rolling the dice. It really is.
Yep.
I will say this though, Keith, that John Schneider, given all of his pluses and minuses, faults, etc., in the draft and evaluating, he's actually strikingly, seemingly, a pretty decent quarterback evaluator. He was, in addition to drafting Russell Wilson, he was apparently looking at Josh Allen in the Bills, and Patrick Mahomes. Very interested in that pick as well. So
yeah, the Seahawks actually
maybe he knows kind of what he's doing as far as finding a talent there.
It was one of the things that came up along the way over the years with Wilson is that the Seahawks offered Wilson to the Browns in exchange for the number 1 overall pick, the one they used to get their current guy that's, probably on his last attempt at being a starting quarterback. And so they were going to use that pick and others that they were going to get to go get Josh Allen. And from what we've seen the last 2 years from Josh Allen, that might have worked out for them because they would have gotten younger and cheaper at the right time and been able to have
and then what you've said today, they're thinking younger, cheaper, but I think they did it at the wrong time. Last year would have been a good time. Next year would have been a good time. This year, not so much. You've got really bad free agency class. You've got really bad draft class, and you've just jettisoned your Hall of Fame quarterback at age 34.
He's younger than that. He's like 32. 31. So, he played at 31 last year. He's going to play at 32 this coming year. So they jettisoned him when he's got
10 years left,
or at least 8. Why are you trading him now? You're right. A year ago, when they could have gotten
5 quarterbacks to choose from, basically.
Yeah, and they could have had Fields as a guy that they wouldn't even had to have moved up in the draft for. They could have just got him. I mean, that's who the Bears ended up with, and they were the ones offering all the picks.
And Khalil Mack and Akeem Hicks and 3 picks.
Yeah. And they would have been in a great position. Or they could wait another year. It's not like Russell Wilson's value is going to go down. And, go into a draft class that actually has viable talent in it at quarterback. Because I don't see it. This is you brought up the year with Mike Glennon,
2012 or 13. Yeah.
Yeah. And Mike Glennon and Geno Smith were the top 2 quarterbacks in that draft class. That's what this draft class is. It's the Mike Glennon and Geno Smith year. None of these guys are franchise quarterbacks. Kenny Pickett, his tape looks like it, but we've seen what the guy with the tiny hands does, and the fumbles. He had, 22 fumbles last year in 12 games. We've seen this movie before. I'm not interested in watching it again. And
I will say this about like Desmond Ridder is he had a tremendous interview process at the combine. Teams loved him. He has good size, etc. You may be wary of his arm strength. That's a factor. However, he's a winner. He's a winner. Like he wins. He's like 44-3 in his career. And he leads. He's a leader. And I heard this. And I'm not just making this up. I've heard this directly from the guys on the NFL channel in their morning show talking about all that kind of stuff. And I would be curious, because we know John Schneider. He probably doesn't want to sit on 9. He wants to trade that thing back. If he traded back 10 picks, he could pick up a 2023 first round pick. That's how much that is worth. If he drops back 5 or 6 picks, he could pick up around the pick number 50 in the second round pick, just for moving around down 5 spots to 15 or so. So, and still get a good quality pick. I mean, this, and we haven't talked about this because we're stuck on this Russell Wilson conversation, and I get that, and it's hard, and everyone's kind of dealing with it in their own way. So I know it's not a great situation, but here we are, and so how do we move forward? And that's kind of what we're focused on. When you take a look at the sample, I mean, we've got a whole bunch of research to do because we haven't even talked about this early in the draft yet with some of these guys. But Jordan Davis at the just blew it up. 141 pounds at defensive tackle. We talked about a guy. Jordan Davis could be available at 9 that you could get. Know.
He's probably going to go
4.78 40.
Yeah, he's a big guy. He's a great player. He's a fantastic athlete. This is like drafting,
Aaron Donald.
No,
I wouldn't. He's got the same sort of athletic upside.
Aaron Donald is a once in 2 generation talent. Right. Let's not go there.
But Jermaine Johnson be there. You've got Trevor Penning at tackle, who's just a beast and a monster that wants to inflict pain.
That's the more interesting pick to me. You can trade back from 9 to 12 or 13. Get an extra pick in late in round 2 or early in round 3, something like that, and get Trevor Penning, who's a franchise left tackle that you can stick out there for a decade and never be worried about. That's the pick that interests me, because you will have solved a huge problem on your roster, and picked up another pick, and not reached for a terrible deep quarterback.
Yeah, and this is a deep draft. And so if the strategy, get your guy, maybe it is like, that's why I mentioned like a Desmond Ridder, because I like him more than Browl or even Pickett or Carson Strong or there's one more guy.
Who's the guy from North Carolina?
And he would be, Sam Howell. See, those guys would be available at the back end of the first round ish. At least that's where everyone's at, right? Big board wise. And so, if you could drop back once or increment up some extra value, you could still get a quarterback that you could bring and develop while you're bridging to next year. Possibly.
Yeah. I just don't see any of those guys as long-term franchise quarterback starter. I think their ceiling is
so you not waste a pick on any quarterback this year and just focus on building the roster around a future quarterback.
Yes,
it's not going to come this year.
Go ahead and lose. Trade away the older guys and be okay with losing. Get a bunch of guys like Trevor guys on the defensive line and cornerback, and just go into this team this year with no quarterback and a lot of young guys that are going to take their lumps and learn. And then you get your quarterback a year from now and you go win with them, and a roster that is young, talented, hungry, and
your cap is under control. And then 2023, in 2023, you've got picks, 2 picks in the first round, 2 picks in the second round, a third, a fourth, 2 picks in a sixth and the seventh, plus any picks you would get from trading away current players.
Okay. Guys like Dunlap and
I mean, Wagner, you would just have a boatload of picks.
Mm-hmm. You could rebuild the roster in a hurry.
I mean, that would be fun while losing. It's not. So how do you balance that? Where as a fan, you're used to a winning franchise. You have a winning coach that's used to winning, that doesn't want to lose. He's going to try to prevent that from happening, I would imagine. I don't know that would be a set strategy that he would set out upon on purpose, Pete Carroll, to go lose that way. But maybe
he won't.
Maybe he would.
I don't think he will.
Interesting.
Although it just a decade ago, he kind of did.
Yes,
he came in 2010 and gutted the roster. Lost a lot of games, all of that. Part of that was because they had an uncapped year, so they could gut the roster and not be saddled with a bunch of dead cap, because there was no salary cap that year. So they got rid of a lot of contracts for guys like TJ Houshmandzadeh and just a lot of bad contracts they were able to jettison. They went bad, they rebuilt the roster. But that was a decade ago. That was a Pete Carroll at 60 years old that had no intention of ever, he was still I've got at least a decade left.
Yeah,
I'm okay with
nothing
the rebuild.
Short term in his mind, right?
Yeah, and so he's now 71.
Yeah, I that's why I'm confounded by this whole thing. That's why I think that they're really trying.
71.
I don't know. I mean, I'm hearing talk John Clayton came out with an article and said they're definitely in rebuild mode. They got rid of their quarterback. They're in rebuild mode. Don't let anybody fool you.
Yeah,
and I've got other guys saying, don't be so sure. Their roster's not that far away. In fact, you started the conversation today about the roster's not that far away.
It wasn't that far away. It is extremely far away right now.
Well, right. But they do have an entire offseason still to go to
24 hours ago. 24 hours ago, they were 3 players away. Today, right now, as we record this is a 3-win team. That's the difference this trade made. And there isn't a path to another quarterback. There isn't another guy available, either in the draft or in free agency or really on the trade market, that puts you back close to where you were only 3 players away. You cannot get better from last year to next year. It's impossible. There's nothing they can do from right now until the start of the season that will make them better next year than they were last year. So if they don't realize that they're rebuilding, then that's on them. And they're just making this process longer and harder. So either recognize the truth, and that's you are going to rebuild this roster and do it right, or move on and let someone come in here who's willing to. Because if they half-assed this and end up with a pick in the low teens or 12, all they've done is set the franchise back another 2 or 3 years.
Longer.
At least.
Longer. Yeah. Yeah,
So,
because by the time you draft a guy, you're going to be at least second year, third year before it's paying off.
Yeah.
That's now beyond Pete Carroll's contract.
Yep. A lot of guys can win in year 2. We saw that with Wilson. We've seen that with Joe Burrow, and other guys. You can win in year 2. You can show flashes.
But those guys are special. Those guys are special. Now, maybe the kid from Alabama, I can't remember his name right off the top of my head, would be, available next year, and he'd be the guy, and he'd go take your franchise and win you a Super Bowl. But there's so much uncertainty. I mean, it just is what it is. This whole thing is now going to be just uncertain for a while. We're just going to have to live with that. It can go a lot of different ways. We're going to have to adapt. Pete Carroll and John Schneider, I'm sure, will come out at some point and say something. Hopefully kind of tell us which direction they're thinking about. Maybe they won't. I would imagine they're probably going to say all the right things to, at least to them, which is, hey, we're still winning. We're going to compete. We're putting together a roster that we think is, right there.
What do we call this part of the year?
Lying
season. So I don't care about any of that. What I want them to come out and do, and I want Russell Wilson to come out and do, is say, this is why we made this decision now. This is why we decided that the Seahawks needed to move on without Wilson, or that Wilson needed to move on from Seattle. I need that to come out and for them to just be transparent about it. And the Seahawks are like, look, we aren't winning this year. We're better off building for the future, getting those picks, and trying to get good for 2023. Or Russell Wilson to say, you know what, I felt like everything's run its course here. They're going to go back into a rebuild. I didn't want to be a part of that. I want to keep trying to win Super Bowls right now, because by the time they're done with the rebuild, how old will I be? I want one of the two parties to tell us the truth, and it'll never happen, but I want one of them to tell us the truth on why this move happened, because it is not good for the Seahawks, no matter how Pete Carroll and John Schneider try and spin it. And it is not good for any Seahawk fan, no matter how much people are angry at Wilson or whatnot, or there's delusional people that think he's not good. There's nothing about this that is good for the Seahawks or their fans. So at least have the decency to give me the truth on what happened. That's what I want right now.
All right. I want that too. Thanks for talking to me today. I know that you were not happy with me.
I wasn't. Sorry.
I apologize. Cheers. All right. Let's get out of here for now. We'll come back later. We'll talk more about this. I'm sure this will be a subject forever now. Beyond this year, this will be something we revisit a long time. This is definitely a turning point in the franchise, a reset moment. And there's an opportunity, though, with every hard thing that you go through, with every thing that just seems like it's a complete cluster, there's an opportunity to make it work and make it right. And I know that there's good people that want to do the right thing, not only good fans, good people in the organization, all the way to the top, that want to make sure that they're putting out a great product. And so a little bit of faith is going to need to be had here with this situation. And let's see how this thing turns out. There's still the entire offseason with free agency and the draft and possible trades, and who knows. I think your path for 2023 is a viable option and should be definitely considered. I'm just curious as to who lands at the quarterback spot this year.
I don't think Pete Carroll is willing to do what I suggested. And
if he's not willing to, then they need to swing big. I mean, so they would have, I would be fine having them go out and expend lots of draft capital for a younger quarterback. Let's say Kyler Murray, who seems to be unhappy in Arizona. Does Watson have all his legal stuff handled as far as the team is concerned when they check into his background?
No, I don't think so. His case is going before a grand jury, and they wouldn't be sending it in front of a grand jury if the district attorney didn't expect the grand jury to agree to indict him. So that whole situation at this point needs to be, it's not an option.
Okay.
If
so, and then there's some other, younger quarterbacks that came into the league last year. There's Daniel Jones sitting there in New York that hasn't really had an opportunity yet to kind of show. Who knows, right? So there could be some trade stuff going on here that, maybe they're just not done with that yet, and we just don't know. So, all right. Find Keith on Twitter at MyersNFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. SeahawksPlaybook.com is the website. Find us on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube, and subscribe. Until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at MyersNFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.